All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to break down a really critical safety rule that pretty much affects every single construction site out there, OSHA's rule on respirable crystalline silica. Now, I know it can sound complicated, but our goal here is to make it super simple and clear. So, let's start with a question to get you thinking. What's one of the most common, yet completely invisible, dangers that's on almost any construction project you can imagine? And the answer is respirable crystalline silica. Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, but it's a fancy name for something really simple: microscopic dust. We're talking about particles that are so tiny you can't see them, and they get kicked up into the air during everyday stuff like cutting concrete, grinding stone, or drilling. And the reason this invisible dust is such a big deal is because the health risks are serious. And they're permanent. Long-term exposure can cause some truly devastating illnesses. I mean, we're talking about things like silicosis. That's an incurable disease that scars your lungs and makes it incredibly hard to breathe. It's also linked to lung cancer, kidney disease, and it can even make you more likely to get tuberculosis. So this is absolutely crucial. Controlling this dust isn't just about following rules. It's about preventing life-altering harm. Okay, so that's the serious stuff. The good news is OSHA gives us a really clear framework for protecting our teams. They've laid out two different paths that every company can choose from to stay compliant and, most importantly, keep workers safe. So let's look at those two paths. Think of path one as OSHA's recipe book. It gives you a specific pre-approved safety recipe for a bunch of common construction jobs. Path two is more like a custom plan. This route gives you a lot more flexibility to create your own safety methods, but, and this is a big but, it comes with the responsibility of actually measuring the dust in the air to prove your plan works. So let's dive into the first option, which is usually the most straightforward one. This is path one, and it's all about following a specific chart called OSHA's Table 1. And here's what that recipe book looks like in practice. It's really simple. Table 1 just pairs a common task, like using a power saw, with a specific control method you have to use, like a built-in water system. If you follow that recipe exactly as it's written, then bam, you're automatically in compliance for that task. No air testing, no fuss. Simple as that. But what if the job you're doing isn't on that list? Or maybe you have a different way of controlling the dust that you think works just as well. Well, that's where path 2 comes in. This is your measure and manage method. Now, if you go down this path, there are two numbers you absolutely have to know. The first one is 25 micrograms per cubic meter. This is called the action level. You can think of it as an early warning sign. If there's even a chance the dust could hit this level, you have to start assessing your workers' exposure. The second, and much more serious number, is 50 micrograms per cubic meter. This is the permissible exposure limit, or PEL. This is the hard red line. It's the absolute legal limit of silica dust a worker can be exposed to over an 8-hour day. Your control methods must keep dust below this number, period. So, following this path is basically a 3-step process. First, you have to assess the exposure, which means doing air monitoring to get real data on your dust levels. Second, you implement controls, things like water sprays or vacuums, to get those levels below the 50 microgram limit. And finally, if those controls still aren't quite enough, you are then required to provide your team with the right respirators. Now here's the thing. Whether you follow the recipe book in path 1 or the custom plan in path 2, your job isn't done. The rule actually requires you to build a complete safety program around all of this. And the absolute heart of that program is your written exposure control plan. You got to think of this document as your company's official safety playbook for how you're going to manage silica dust on every single job. And this playbook has to be detailed. It needs to list every single task that kicks up silica dust, the specific controls you're using for each one, and your housekeeping rules, like, for example, banning dry sweeping. It also has to name a designated competent person. That's someone on site who's in charge of making sure the plan is actually being followed. All right, the next piece of this program is all about protecting your people directly. And that's through medical monitoring and really good training. The rule is very specific on this point. Any employee who has to wear a respirator for 30 or more days a year because of this silica standard, well, they must be offered medical surveillance. So what's in this medical program? It starts with an initial exam, and then you have checkups every 3 years. These exams include a chest x-ray and a lung function test. And this part really shows you how important worker health is. The employer has to cover the full cost of all of this. It's provided at absolutely no cost to the employee. And right alongside that medical care is education. Your crew needs to be trained so they really understand the health dangers of silica. They need to know which jobs create dust and how to properly use all the safety controls and respirators you give them. Plus, they need to know all about that medical surveillance program. Okay, let's talk about the final piece of the compliance puzzle. This is what holds the entire program together and proves that you're doing everything right. Keeping good records. You are required to keep accurate records of 3 key things. First, the results from any air monitoring you do. Second, any other data you use to figure out exposure levels. And third, all the medical records for every employee who's in that surveillance program. You know, as we start to wrap this up, it's really easy to get lost in the details. The exposure limits, the medical exams, the written plans. But it is so important to remember the real reason behind all of this. This is not just about checking boxes or filing paperwork. It's about protecting people's health and their lives. And that really leads to the final, most crucial question. Having a plan that follows the rules is the first step, sure, but it's not the end goal. So the real question I want to leave you with is this. Is your safety plan something that just sits in a binder on a shelf? Or is it a living, breathing part of your daily culture on the job site?
If you found this helpful or want to stay updated when this regulation changes, subscribe and support the channel. And if you need the full technical details on this CFR, click the link in the description below. See you next time.